Most men cry when they discover their wife is sleeping with their biggest business rival. They scream. They punch walls. I didn't do any of that. Instead, I poured a glass of neat bourbon, sat in the pitch dark of my study, and opened my laptop. I didn't see a broken heart in the glow of the screen. I saw a spreadsheet. And on that spreadsheet, I calculated exactly how much my wife's betrayal was going to cost her. The grand total? $0. That is what she was going to have left when I was done with her. Not a single penny more. Welcome to one of those real-life betrayed cheater stories that doesn't end in a petty shouting match, but in a cold, calculated financial execution. If you want to see exactly how a prenup can become a lethal legal weapon, drop a like and subscribe right now, because you'll want to hear every single step of this setup. My name is Kevin. I build things. Specifically, I build upscale, high-volume restaurant chains across Texas. It's a brutal, high-stakes industry where profit margins are razor-thin and operational efficiency is everything. 5 years ago, my empire was growing fast, but my personal life was empty. Then I met Jessica. She was sharp, possessed a master's degree in corporate finance from a top-tier university, and had a smile that could freeze water. I fell hard. Or rather, I fell into the trap of believing she loved the man, not the portfolio. Before we walked down the aisle at a lavish resort in Austin, my corporate attorneys handed me a thick stack of papers. A prenuptial agreement. My father always told me, protect the house you built before you let someone else move in. Jessica didn't even blink when she signed it. In fact, she laughed, tossing her blonde hair back with an air of complete indifference. You think I'm after your money, Kevin? She'd said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I have my own career. I love you, not your bank account. The prenup was explicit. Anything I owned before the marriage remained exclusively mine. However, any profits, assets, or corporate equity generated during the marriage from the restaurant group would be split exactly 50/50 in the event of a divorce. It seemed fair at the time. A year into our marriage, when my old CFO retired, I made Jessica the chief financial officer of the company. I trusted her with the keys to the kingdom. I thought we were a team. I thought we were building a legacy together. I was dead wrong. Jessica didn't want a legacy. She wanted a massive, unearned payday. By year 3, the dynamic completely shifted. Jessica's attitude turned toxic. She began looking at me not as a husband or a partner, but as an inconvenience, a simpleton who just happened to hold the crown. She started staying late at our corporate headquarters in downtown Dallas, claiming the quarterly tax audits and supply chain restructurings were draining her. When I tried to surprise her with dinner or book a weekend getaway to Cabo, she'd just roll her eyes and sighs. You're just a guy who got lucky selling steaks, Kevin, she told me one night over a cold dinner, her phone buzzing constantly next to her plate. Her tone was casually dismissive, designed to cut me down to size. You don't understand high-level corporate finance. You handle the kitchens and the menus. Let me handle the real numbers. I'm the one keeping this ship afloat. I didn't argue. I'm a stoic by nature. When people show you their true colors, you don't yell at them, you just take notes. I noticed she started buying designer clothes that never showed up on our joint credit cards. I noticed her phone was always face down on the kitchen counter. I noticed the way she smelled when she walked through the front door at 2 a.m., a distinct, heavy blend of expensive oud cologne and premium cigar smoke. I don't smoke cigars. But Marcus Vance does. Marcus Vance was the CEO of Vance Hospitality, my fiercest, most ruthless competitor in the Texas market. For 18 months, he'd been trying to hostilely take over my prime locations. He was loud, arrogant, and hated the fact that my restaurants consistently beat his in quarterly revenue. And now, he was sleeping with my wife. The discovery didn't happen because of a sloppy text message or a lipstick stain. It happened through a paper trail. I might just be a guy who got lucky selling steaks, but you don't build a multi-million-dollar enterprise without knowing how to audit your own business. I was running a routine balance sheet check on our secondary supply chain accounts, a small, seemingly insignificant logistics subsidiary we used for local Texas beef distribution. Something was completely off. A shell company registered in Delaware called JV Holdings was receiving hefty monthly consulting fees from our corporate account. The authorized electronic signature on every single one of those transfers belonged to Jessica. I didn't confront her. I didn't storm into her office and make a scene. I sat perfectly still in my chair, my chest tightening for exactly 60 seconds while I processed the reality that the woman sleeping next to me every night was actively robbing me blind. Then, the emotion died completely. The businessman took over. I immediately hired an independent forensic accountant and a top-tier private investigator out of Houston. Within 2 weeks, they delivered an encrypted file that made my blood run cold. Jessica wasn't just having a sordid affair with Marcus Vance. They were operating a coordinated corporate espionage ring. She was funneling our proprietary recipe metrics, our upcoming expansion location data, and our internal profit margins straight to Vance Hospitality. Even worse, she was intentionally inflating our operational debts on paper to make my company look unstable, while draining our liquid cash reserves directly into JV Holdings. Her plan was obvious. She was going to file for divorce, claim her 50% of the marital profits, and leave me with a hollowed-out, bankrupt shell of a company while she walked away into the sunset with Marcus and millions of my hard-earned dollars. Last night she sat across from me at our marble kitchen island. She was sipping a glass of expensive Chardonnay, typing furiously on her phone, a small, smug smile playing on her lips. "Everything okay at the office, honey?" I asked, my voice completely level, perfectly warm. She didn't even look up at me. "Fine, Kevin. Just trying to fix the mess your regional managers made. Honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm running this entire company alone while you just coast." An ordinary man would have cracked. An ordinary man would have thrown the wine glass across the room. I just smiled, took a slow sip of my water, and nodded. "I appreciate your hard work, Jess. Truly." She thought she was the smartest person in the room. She thought her plan was flawless. But she forgot one tiny, microscopic clause embedded deep within page 42 of our prenuptial agreement. A clause her high-priced lawyers had skimmed right over 5 years ago. She thought she was leaving me with nothing. She had absolutely no idea she had just signed her own financial death warrant. The forensic accountant I hired didn't look like a guy who could destroy a life. Arthur was 62, wore faded corduroy jackets that smelled like stale coffee, and operated out of a cramped office in North Dallas that looked like a paper recycling plant. But when it came to tracking dirty money, Arthur was a bloodhound. He slid a thick, blue manila folder across his cluttered desk. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a low, irritating note. "Your wife is smart, Kevin," Arthur said, tapping the folder with a yellow pencil. "But she's sloppy because she thinks you're not paying attention. She's been routing money through your regional meat distribution accounts. Every time a shipment of Texas ribeye goes out to your top 5 locations, an inflated invoice is generated. The excess cash gets channeled directly into an anonymous Wells Fargo business account under JV Holdings LLC. Over the last 14 months, she's bled your operating capital of exactly $1.2 million. I didn't blink. I didn't lean back. I kept my hands folded flat on his desk. "And the signature on the authorization files?" "Digital tokens," Arthur replied, leaning in. "Every single one of them was generated from her corporate laptop. Usually on Tuesday nights around 11 o'clock. She's not just skimming, Kevin. She's deliberately lowering your cash on hand. If your business experiences a sudden supply chain shock or a spike in food costs right now, you won't have the liquidity to cover it. You'd be forced to default on your expansion loans. Which means Marcus Vance could swoop in and buy my prime locations for pennies on the dollar." I muttered. The pieces fit together with a sickening, beautiful logic. "Exactly," Arthur said, looking at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. "She's setting you up for a corporate execution. Aren't you going to say something? Throw something?" "No," I said quietly, taking the folder. "Anger is an expensive luxury, Arthur. I prefer profit. I left his office and drove my truck to a quiet, unassuming diner off Interstate 35. I sat in a back booth, ordering a black coffee I didn't intend to drink. 5 minutes later, Miller arrived. He was my private investigator, a former Dallas PD detective who looked like a tired high school football coach. He didn't say a word. He just slid a high-speed flash drive across the Formica table and took a seat opposite me. "The Rosewood Mansion Hotel," Miller said, flagging down the waitress for a menu. "Room 412. They meet there every Thursday morning under the guise of an executive lunch with regional suppliers. I got the security footage from the garage, and I managed to get a directional microphone pointed at their balcony while they were having drinks." I plugged the flash drive into the tablet I had brought along and put on a single earbud. The audio was slightly grainy, distorted by the Dallas wind, but the voices were unmistakable. "He actually asked me if everything was okay at the office." Jessica's laugh came through the speaker, sharp and mocking. It was the same laugh she used when she talked about her old college friends who hadn't married rich. "He's so clueless, Marcus. He just sits there with that blank, stupid stare of his, nodding along. He thinks we're just having a rough patch because of my workload. The man is a glorified line cook who got lucky with a seasoning recipe." Marcus Vance's deep, arrogant voice boomed through the audio. "How long until the next loan payment is due?" 3 weeks, Jessica replied, her voice dropping into a chillingly transactional tone. "I've already altered the internal accounting ledger to show a projected 20% deficit in our Austin and Houston markets. The board will panic. When Kevin tries to draw from the reserve fund to cover the loan, he'll find out it's completely locked up in a secondary escrow account for vendor disputes that I fabricated. He'll have no choice but to sell the rights to the interstate expansion to you." "And the divorce?" Marcus asked. I could hear the distinct clink of their glasses touching. "The second-year contract for the expansion is signed, I file," Jessica said smoothly. "Our prenup guarantees me 50% of all corporate equity generated during the marriage. Since we built the top 3 locations while we were married, I'll walk away with half the value of his entire life's work. He'll be left with a bankrupt name and a pile of debt. I can't wait to see his face when he realizes he's worth absolutely nothing." I pulled the earbud out. My expression hadn't changed. My pulse was a steady 60 beats per minute. "You want me to keep tailing them?" Miller asked, his eyes studying my face, looking for a crack in my composure. "Yes," I said, my voice completely steady. "Keep the cameras rolling. I want a perfect, unbroken timeline of every single dollar they spend and every single room they share." When I got home that evening, the house was immaculate. Our custom-built, modern home in the upscale neighborhood of Preston Hollow felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage set. Jessica was standing in the kitchen, wearing a pristine white silk blouse, pouring 2 glasses of Cabernet. She looked radiant, confident, completely in control of her little universe. "Hey, stranger," she said, flashing that flawless, blinding smile as she handed me a glass. "You look tired. Hard day at the office?" "Just dealing with some logistics issues," I said, taking a sip of the wine. It tasted like ash in my mouth, but I swallowed it anyway. "The cost of beef is fluctuating." She let out a soft, patronizing sigh, stepping closer to adjust the collar of my shirt. Her hands were warm. It was incredible how a person could touch you with the same hands they used to stab you in the back. "I told you, Kevin, you worry too much about the small details," she said, her voice dripping with that manufactured warmth she used for her corporate presentations. "That's why you have me. I'm actually working on a major restructuring plan right now that will take a lot of pressure off your shoulders. We just need to reallocate some capital from our reserve accounts to secure a new logistics partnership." "Oh? What kind of partnership?" I asked, looking directly into her green eyes. "A local distribution firm called JV Holdings," she said without a single tremor in her voice. She lied with the absolute ease of a sociopath. "They have a massive network that can cut our shipping costs by 15%. I just need you to sign off on a routine capital transfer tomorrow morning." It's about $800,000. It'll streamline everything, trust me. She was asking me to voluntarily hand over the final nail in my own coffin. If I signed that paper, my company's reserves would be completely depleted, triggering the exact loan default she and Marcus had discussed at the Rosewood Mansion. Sounds like you've thought of everything, I said, maintaining a calm, appreciative smile. I always do, she said, tapping my chest playfully before walking toward the living room. We need to protect our future, Kevin. After all, what's mine is yours, right? Right, I murmured to the empty kitchen. I sat down at the dining table, pulling out my laptop. I opened a password-protected, encrypted document that Jessica didn't even know existed. It was the original draft of our prenuptial agreement, specifically page 42, subsection D. When Jessica and her legal team had reviewed the prenup 5 years ago, they focused entirely on the high-level asset distribution clauses, the 50-50th split of marital equity. They were so blinded by the prospect of that massive payout that they treated the boilerplate legal definitions at the back of the document as mere formalities. They skimmed right over a specific, ironclad clause that my father's lifelong attorney had insisted on inserting into every contract I ever signed. The clause was titled, Forfeiture of Marital Assets via Corporate Malfeasance and Fiduciary Breach. It explicitly stated that if either party engaged in willful financial fraud, embezzlement, or unauthorized diversion of corporate funds from the restaurant group during the marriage, that party would completely and irrevocably forfeit all rights to any marital assets, corporate equity, or spousal support. In the eyes of the law, if she stole from the company, she walked away from the marriage with exactly what she brought into it, $0. But to trigger that clause in a Texas court, I couldn't just show that she was skimming money. I had to let her execute her plan completely. I had to let her think she was winning. If I stopped her now, her lawyers would argue it was a simple accounting dispute or a misunderstanding between spouses. I needed her to fully commit the crime. I needed her to sign the final documents that proved she was intentionally trying to bankrupt the company in collusion with a direct competitor. The next morning, I walked into her corporate office at our headquarters. She was sitting behind her glass desk, looking over a set of financial papers. When she saw me, she quickly minimized the window on her laptop. Do you have that capital transfer authorization? I asked, placing my hands on her desk. Right here, she said, sliding a single sheet of paper toward me. Her eyes were wide, filled with an eager, greedy anticipation that she was trying desperately to hide. Just sign at the bottom, Kevin. I'll take care of the rest. You won't have to worry about a thing. I picked up the pen. I looked at the line where my signature would go. This was the trap. If I signed, I was putting my entire life's work on the line. But I knew something she didn't. I wasn't signing my destruction. I was signing her arrest warrant. I looked up at her, giving her one last chance to show a shred of humanity. Are you sure this is the right move for us, Jess? No secrets? She didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. Of course, honey. I love you. I'd never do anything to hurt our business. I lowered the pen to the paper and signed my name in clear, bold ink. Jessica practically snatched the document out of my hand, her eyes flashing with a sudden, terrifying coldness that she didn't even bother to conceal anymore. Great. I'll process this immediately. You can go back to the kitchens now, Kevin. I've got this under control. I nodded, turned around, and walked out of her office. As the heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, I pulled out my phone and dialed Arthur's number. It's done, I said coldly. She just took the bait. Freeze the backup secondary accounts and prepare the forensic audit trail. We're going to war. The money moved at exactly 9:14 a.m. I watched the notification flash on my phone while sitting in the parking lot of Sterling and Associates. $800,000. Sucked clean out of my primary operations reserve and routed directly into the black hole of JV Holdings LLC. It felt like watching someone strip the engine out of my car while I sat trapped in the driver's seat. But I didn't panic. I didn't flinch. I just turned off the ignition, stepped out of my truck, and walked up to the office. Eleanor Sterling didn't look like a savior. She looked like a velvet hammer. She was 55, wore a sharp gray tailored suit, kept her silver hair cropped close, and possessed a gaze that could dismantle a hostile deposition in 5 seconds flat. Arthur was already inside her conference room, his faded corduroy jacket replaced by an equally wrinkled tweed one. The table was completely covered in bank statements, corporate registries, and wire transfer receipts. She didn't waste a single second, Eleanor said, sliding a laptop toward me the moment I sat down. The moment your signature cleared the internal banking system, she executed the wire transfer. But here's the real beauty of her greed, Kevin. She didn't send it to a logistics vendor. Within 12 minutes and 40 seconds, JV Holdings wired exactly $750,000 of that money to a commercial real estate escrow account in downtown Dallas. Want to guess who owns the entity purchasing that property? Marcus Vance, I said, my voice flat. Vance Hospitality Holdings, Arthur corrected, a rare, grim smile breaking through his dry, chapped lips. He's buying an old industrial warehouse district on the edge of the city to convert into a massive luxury dining hub. Your hard-earned money is literally funding his expansion project. She didn't just skim your profits, Kevin. This is a direct, completely undocumented transfer of corporate capital to your primary market competitor. It's a textbook, undeniable breach of fiduciary duty. Is it enough to trigger page 42? I asked, looking directly at Eleanor. Eleanor leaned back in her leather chair, her fingers laced together. For a normal divorce? Yes, it's more than enough to ruin her reputation. But for page 42, subsection D of your specific prenuptial agreement? We need one more definitive element. Right now, her high-priced defense lawyers could easily argue in court that you signed the initial authorization, making it a legitimate corporate decision that simply turned bad. They'll try to claim it was a spousal misunderstanding or a failed investment strategy. We need to completely eliminate that loophole. We need to prove willful intent to defraud. We need her to explicitly cover her tracks by lying on an official, state-submitted corporate filing. Arthur nodded, tapping a calendar on the table. The quarterly Texas Franchise Tax and Public Information Report is due next week. As CFO, she is solely responsible for preparing and certifying those numbers under penalty of perjury. If she covers up this $800,000 transfer on those sworn state documents, she's no longer just a bad wife playing games. She's a felon committing corporate fraud against the state. And the moment she files it, the prenup's forfeiture clause triggers automatically without the need for a lengthy, messy trial. Then we give her the rope to hang herself, I said quietly. That night I gave her the perfect stage to play her hand. I came home late, intentionally leaving my tie undone and my hair slightly disheveled. I sat at the marble kitchen island with a massive stack of old, unrelated logistics invoices scattered around me, rubbing my temples in faux exhaustion. I wanted her to see a man who was utterly broken, a man who was drowning under the weight of a failing business. Jessica walked into the kitchen at 8 p.m. She brought takeout from an expensive French bistro downtown, but she only set down a single container. For herself. She didn't even bother to ask if I had eaten. Still staring at papers? She asked, her voice light, dripping with a condescending pity that made my skin prickle. She opened her container, the rich scent of truffles immediately filling the kitchen. You know, Kevin, if you spent less time micromanaging the kitchen schedules and more time actually understanding macroeconomics, you wouldn't look like you're on the verge of a stroke every single night. The reserve account is low, Jess, I said, keeping my voice intentionally raspy, laced with a carefully manufactured panic. The bank called me about our primary expansion loan today. They noticed the $800,000 draw from the operations fund. They're starting to ask some very pointed questions about JV Holdings. They want to see the vendor contracts. She stopped chewing. For a fraction of a second, her green eyes narrowed, her entire body freezing. It was the only time I had ever seen her look startled. But then, the practiced, fluid mask of the brilliant CFO slid right back into place. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her sparkling water, looking down at me like I was an annoying child. I handled the bank, Kevin, she said, her tone suddenly turning sharp, aggressive, the classic defense mechanism of a narcissist who felt cornered. I told them it's a standard corporate restructuring cost. If you start panicking and calling the loan officers behind my back, you're going to completely ruin our institutional credibility. You need to stay in your lane and let me handle the money. But the loan payment is due in less than 2 weeks, I said, looking up at her, letting my eyes look wide, desperate, and weak. If we don't show the required cash reserves on our quarterly balance sheet, they could accelerate the note. We could lose the entire Austin location, Jess. Everything we built there. Jessica walked around the marble island, leaning over me until she was inches away. She smelled strongly of that expensive oud cologne again. She didn't even care to hide it anymore. She thought I was too stupid, too oblivious to ever put the pieces together. Listen to me very carefully, Kevin, she whispered, her voice cold and venomous. This is exactly why I should have full, unilateral operational control of this company. You built a nice little steakhouse chain, sure. But you simply don't have the brains for the big leagues. You're small time. If we lose Austin, it's because your incompetent management team failed to control food costs, not because of my financial strategy. Do you understand me? You are the problem here. I forced myself to look down at the invoices, pretending to swallow my pride, letting my hands tremble slightly. What do we do then? How do we fix the balance sheet before the state filing? She reached into her designer leather tote bag and pulled out a sleek blue folder. She slapped it down directly on top of my papers. Sign this corporate resolution. It authorizes me, as CFO, to sign and file all upcoming state tax disclosures and financial reports without requiring your secondary signature for verification. It speeds up the processing time so I can quietly secure an emergency line of credit from an outside investor to cover the reserve gap. An outside investor. She meant Marcus Vance. She wanted to use my own signature to strip away my last line of defense, allowing her to falsify the state documents without me seeing them. Is this completely legal, Jess? I asked, staring at the line where my name would go. Bypassing the CEO's review for a state tax filing? Are you seriously questioning my degree right now, Kevin? She snapped, her voice rising, full of calculated, theatrical outrage. I gave up a lucrative career at a top-tier corporate accounting firm to run your miserable, glorified kitchen. I am actively trying to save your skin from bankruptcy, and you're sitting here interrogating me? Sign the paper right now, or I walk out that front door, file for divorce, and you can watch this entire company burn to the ground by Friday morning. The sheer trumpery of her performance was spectacular. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted me to believe I was the failure so I would blindly hand over the keys. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed the corporate resolution, giving her sole, unverified authority to file the state reports. Thank you, she said, practically snatching the folder away from me with a smug, triumphant smirk. She didn't even bother to finish her expensive dinner. She grabbed her phone, walked upstairs to our master bedroom, and loudly locked the door behind her. I sat alone in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator. She thought she had stripped me of my armor. She had absolutely no idea she had just agreed to hold the smoking gun. 2 days later, Miller called my burner phone at 11 p.m. I'm parked outside Vance's private lake cabin in Fort Worth, Miller said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper over the secure line. They're celebrating. I've got the long-range directional audio feed running right now. You need to hear this, Kevin. It's live. I clicked the link on my laptop, putting in my earbud. The audio cleared, cutting through the static of the Texas wind. He actually signed it. Jessica's voice came through, slightly slurred, followed by a cruel, mocking giggle. I could hear the background music, soft jazz, and the distinct clink of ice cubes against crystal. He literally looked like he was about to burst into tears, Marcus. He signed away his right to review the state filings. I just submitted the Texas franchise tax report to the state portal an hour ago. I omitted the JV Holdings transfer entirely and listed the $800,000 as an unrecoverable operational loss due to bad inventory management in his Houston sector. Beautiful. Marcus Vance's deep, arrogant laugh boomed through the speaker, making my jaw tighten slightly. So on paper, his company is technically insolvent, and he's personally liable for the misreported losses if his board of directors ever runs an independent audit. Exactly, Jessica said, her voice turning cold, predatory, and completely transactional. The emergency board meeting is set for next Thursday at 10 a.m. I'll present the falsified tax documents showing his gross negligence in operations. The board will immediately vote to remove him as CEO, and your firm can swoop in with the prearranged buyout offer. Once the buyout is approved, I file the divorce papers. With the 50-50th split of the remaining equity and my private cut of your buyout payout, I'll take him for every single thing he has left. He won't even have enough money to pay his rent. You're a vicious woman, Jess, Marcus murmured, his tone amused but laced with a subtle, sudden edge of caution. I like it. I'm a smart woman, Marcus, she shot back. Kevin thought he could keep me under his thumb with that stupid prenup. He thought because he built the brand, he owned me. He's about to find out what happens when you completely underestimate the person who controls your bank accounts. Then, the audio shifted. I heard the sound of footsteps as Marcus walked away to take a phone call on the balcony. I heard the rustle of Jessica's silk clothes, followed by the rapid tapping of her fingers on her phone screen. A few seconds later, she muttered to herself, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. Enjoy your little victory while you can, Marcus, she whispered under her breath, entirely unaware that my private investigator's microphone was catching every single syllable. Once I'm completely done with Kevin and his company, you're next on my list. Your corporate compliance records are an absolute mess, and I've got digital copies of every single one of them. I leaned back in my office chair, staring up at the ceiling. A double cross within a double cross. Jessica wasn't just trying to destroy my life. She was already planning to blackmail Marcus Vance the exact moment she was free of our marriage. She was an equal opportunity parasite. She truly, deeply believed she was the smartest predator in the entire state of Texas. The next morning, I met Eleanor Sterling and Arthur at a private conference room in a boutique bank downtown. This wasn't my company's regular financial institution. This was a private asset management firm where I had quietly moved my personal holdings months ago, long before Jessica ever thought about becoming CFO. Arthur laid out the final pieces of the trap on the glass table. She filed the state tax documents at exactly 9:42 last night, Kevin. It's official. It's locked into the state database. She certified them under penalty of perjury, using the sole corporate authority you granted her in that resolution. He displayed the official digital receipt on the large monitor mounted on the wall. Look right here at line 14. She officially categorized the $800,000 as an unrecoverable operational deficit caused by undisclosed supply chain waste in your Houston restaurants. She signed her legal name to a massive state and federal lie. Eleanor smiled. It was a cold, clinical, and utterly terrifying expression. By doing this, she has officially and irreversibly triggered subsection D of page 42 of your prenuptial agreement. She engaged in willful financial fraud, embezzlement, and unauthorized diversion of corporate funds to a direct competitor, then falsified government records to conceal it. The terms of your prenup are explicit: an immediate, absolute forfeiture of all marital property, all corporate equity, and all spousal claims. She has legally disqualified herself from receiving a single dollar. What about Marcus Vance? I asked, my voice calm. We have the certified bank trail showing the money moving from JV Holdings directly into his commercial real estate escrow account. Eleanor explained, tapping a stack of legal documents. That makes him an active, documented co-conspirator in corporate espionage and grand larceny. If this goes to a public court, his entire hospitality empire will collapse overnight under the weight of federal racketeering charges. He'll be ruined. We aren't going to a public court, I said quietly, a cold smile finally touching my lips. Not yet. I want her to walk into that boardroom thinking she's about to take my life away. The emergency board meeting is in exactly 6 days, Arthur said, looking up from his final financial spreadsheets. She thinks she's going to walk in there and completely impeach you. She's already sent the formal agenda to all the board members, listing your gross operational failures as the sole topic of discussion. Let her, I said, standing up and buttoning my suit jacket. I want every single board member in that room. I want Marcus Vance's legal team waiting in the wings. I want her to feel the absolute, intoxicating peak of her triumph right before I pull the entire floor out from under her feet. Are you entirely ready for this, Kevin? Eleanor asked, her sharp gray eyes scanning my face for any hint of hesitation. When we drop this folder on that boardroom table, there is no turning back. Your marriage is over. Your life changes. Permanently. My marriage ended 14 months ago when she started routing my money to another man's bank account. I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Right now, Eleanor, this isn't about a marriage. It's just a foreclosure. I went back to work that afternoon. I walked through the busy kitchen of my flagship Dallas location, listening to the familiar clatter of pans and the shouting of the line cooks. This was the empire I built with my own sweat and blood, long before Jessica ever stepped into her first pair of designer heels. She thought she could steal it all with a few strokes of a keyboard and a handful of toxic lies. When I returned home that evening, Jessica was standing in the living room, packing a small designer suitcase. Going somewhere? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't look guilty. She just looked annoyed that I was breathing the same air as her. A corporate retreat in Austin, Kevin. To meet with some potential new suppliers. I told you about it last week, not that you ever listen. Another lie. She was going to Marcus's private lake house to celebrate. Right. I forgot, I said, stepping aside to let her pass. She paused at the front door, looking at me with a strange, mocking expression that was pure rage bait. Make sure you wear a decent suit next Thursday, Kevin. The board meeting is incredibly important for our future. You don't want to look like a clueless line cook in front of our primary investors. I'll wear my absolute best suit, Jess, I said softly. Good, she said, swinging her bag over her shoulder without another word. See you Thursday. I watched her red taillights disappear down the long driveway. I walked back into the massive, empty house, poured myself a double shot of neat bourbon, and sat down at the kitchen island. 6 days left. 6 days until Jessica found out exactly what it felt like to be worth absolutely $0. The boardroom on the 22nd floor of our corporate headquarters always smelled of lemon polish and expensive anxiety. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Dallas skyline stretched out under a punishing June sun, all glass and concrete, shimmering in the heat. Inside, the air conditioning hummed at a freezing 68 degrees. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, wearing a dark navy Tom Ford suit. My shirt cuffs were crisp. My tie was perfectly straight. I looked exactly like a chief executive officer who was completely in control of his empire. Jessica sat directly opposite me. She had brought a small army. 2 corporate litigation attorneys from a high-priced firm downtown sat on either side of her, their tablets open, their expressions neutral and cold. Jessica wore a tailored emerald green dress that screamed power. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a sleek, flawless ponytail. She had a manicured hand resting casually on a thick leather folder. She didn't look like a woman who was cheating on her husband. She looked like an executioner who had already picked out her outfit for the hanging. The 7 members of our board of directors filed in one by one. These were men and women I had known for a decade. People who had invested their own money into my vision when I was just running 2 small steak joints in Austin. They looked uncomfortable. They avoided my eyes, choosing instead to stare at their polished shoes or the smart glasses sitting on the table. Jessica had spent the last 48 hours calling each of them privately, priming them for the slaughter. At exactly 10 a.m., Jessica stood up. She didn't ask for permission to speak. She didn't need to. She held the room with the absolute, toxic confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Jessica began, her voice carrying a perfectly rehearsed tone of professional sorrow. She looked around the room, making direct eye contact with each board member. "I called this emergency meeting because as your chief financial officer, I have a fiduciary duty to protect this company. And right now, our company is facing an existential crisis due to gross operational incompetence at the highest level." I sat completely still. I didn't lean forward. I didn't interrupt. I just watched her face. I noticed the tiny pulse vibrating in her neck. I noticed the slight, arrogant tilt of her chin. Gillian Flynn once wrote about the quiet, terrifying precision of a woman who knows exactly how to destroy a man. Jessica was trying to be that woman. Over the past fiscal year, Jessica continued, opening her folder and projecting a series of financial charts onto the large screen behind her. Our Houston and Austin sectors have experienced unprecedented, catastrophic losses. We are looking at a projected deficit of over $800,000 in unrecoverable operational waste. Our food costs are spiraling, our inventory management is a disaster, and our cash reserves have been completely depleted. Bill, our oldest board member, frowned, tapping his pen against his knuckles. "Kevin, is this accurate? How did we lose $800,000 in inventory control over 2 quarters? Before I could answer, Jessica cut in, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Kevin doesn't know, Bill. Because Kevin spends his time hiding in the kitchens, playing with menu items instead of looking at the actual macroeconomics of our enterprise. He's a founder. He's a great line cook who got lucky with a steak seasoning. But he is not an executive. His stubborn refusal to modernize our logistics network has brought us to the brink of default on our primary expansion loans." The room went dead silent. The board members looked at me, waiting for the explosion. They expected me to yell. They expected me to defend my honor, to throw a tantrum, to prove her right by losing my mind. I just reached for my glass of ice water, took a slow, deliberate sip, and set it back down on the exact center of its coaster. "Go on, Jess," I said softly, my voice completely level. "Please, finish your presentation." My calm seemed to irritate her. Her eyes flashed with a sudden, vicious annoyance. She didn't want a stoic husband, she wanted a screaming victim. "I don't just have a problem, gentlemen. I have a solution," Jessica said, her tone snapping back to a sharp, triumphant rhythm. She turned to the door. "With the sole corporate authority granted to me by Kevin himself under a signed resolution last week, I have negotiated an emergency restructuring buyout. I'd like to introduce our new managing partner." The heavy boardroom door opened. Marcus Vance walked in. He wore a bespoke gray pinstriped suit, a heavy gold Rolex gleaming on his wrist. He had the wide, predatory smile of a man who had just bought a politician. He didn't look at me. He walked straight over to Jessica, shaking her hand with an exaggerated formality that was almost comical given where they had spent their last Thursday afternoon. "Morning, everyone," Marcus said, his deep voice filling the room with unearned authority. "Vance Hospitality is prepared to inject $2 million of immediate liquidity into this company to cover the reserve deficit and save your expansion loans. In exchange, we require a 51% controlling interest in the interstate expansion rights. Jessica will remain as CFO and assume the role of acting CEO to ensure operational stability." "And what happens to Kevin?" Sarah, another board member, asked quietly. Jessica looked at me, a cold, mocking smirk finally breaking through her professional mask. It was pure, unadulterated rage bait. She wanted to see me break in front of my peers. "Kevin will be removed from all executive operations immediately," Jessica said, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "We will allow him to retain a non-voting advisory role for the culinary department. He can help choose the steaks, but he will no longer have access to the corporate accounts or the decision-making process. It's time for the adults to run the business, Kevin." One of her lawyers immediately slid a thick stack of legal documents across the mahogany table toward me. "We need your signature on the corporate abdication and the Vance buyout agreement, Kevin," If you refuse, the board will vote to remove you for cause based on the certified state tax documents filed on Tuesday. I looked down at the paper. Then I looked up at Jessica. You filed the certified Texas franchise tax report on Tuesday night, correct? Without my secondary review? You signed the resolution giving me sole authority, Kevin, she said, her voice rising in a tone of supreme condescension. I filed it under penalty of perjury, certifying that our losses were due to your operational waste. The state has accepted it. It's done. You are trapped, and you have absolutely no moves left. Sign the papers and save yourself the public humiliation of a corporate ouster. I let a long, heavy silence fill the room. The hum of the air conditioner felt like a countdown. No, I said quietly. Jessica let out a sharp, ugly laugh. No? You think you have a choice? Bill, Tom, Sarah, let's call for the vote right now. Let's remove him. Before you take that vote, I said, leaning back in my leather chair, my hands folded calmly over my stomach, I think we should introduce a few more guests to this meeting. I raised my left hand and pressed a button on the intercom system built into the table. Eleanor, Arthur, you can come in now. The side door of the boardroom opened. Eleanor Sterling walked in first, her gray tailored suit immaculate, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. Behind her came Arthur, holding a massive stack of bound, blue-covered forensic folders. Jessica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, her green eyes darting to Eleanor. What is this? Kevin, this is an internal board meeting. You can't just bring random people into this room. This is Eleanor Sterling, I said, my voice dropping into a cold, terrifying register that made the entire room stiffen. She is my personal legal counsel. And this is Arthur Pendleton, an independent forensic accountant retained by the majority shareholders of this company. Eleanor didn't waste a single word. She stood at the end of the table, opened her briefcase, and began sliding Arthur's blue folders down the table, placing one in front of every single board member. She didn't give one to Jessica, and she didn't give one to Marcus Vance. What is the meaning of this? Marcus barked, his face turning a deep, angry shade of red. I'm the CEO of Vance Hospitality. I don't have time for this circus. You're going to want to sit down. Mr. Vance? Eleanor said, her voice like a razor blade slicing through silk. Because if you walk out that door, my next phone call is to the Texas Rangers Criminal Investigation Division and the IRS Fraud Unit. Marcus froze. He looked at Jessica, but Jessica was staring at the front page of the blue folder. The color was slowly draining from her face. If you turn to tab 1, I said, addressing the board, you will see the complete, certified digital audit trail of our secondary meat distribution accounts. Over the past 14 months, my wife, acting as CFO, has systematically generated fraudulent, inflated invoices. She did not lose $800,000 in inventory waste. She stole it. That's a lie. Jessica screamed, slamming her manicured hands onto the table, her perfect ponytail shaking with a sudden, uncontrolled rage. He's making things up. He's trying to deflect from his own failures. Turn to tab 2, Eleanor said calmly, completely ignoring Jessica's outburst. There you will find the certified wire transfer records from Wells Fargo. The stolen $800,000 was routed through a shell company called JV Holdings LLC, an entity solely owned by Jessica. And 12 minutes after each transfer, JV Holdings wired those exact funds to a commercial real estate escrow account downtown. An account used to purchase an industrial warehouse district registered under Vance Hospitality. The boardroom went completely, utterly silent. You could hear the faint sound of traffic 22 floors below. Bill looked up from his folder, his eyes wide with shock, staring at Jessica like he was seeing a ghost. You stole from our reserves to fund your competitor's expansion? Bill whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. Jessica's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at her two high-priced attorneys, but they were already leaning away from her, their eyes locked onto the legal precedents cited in Eleanor's files. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one. But here is the real masterpiece of her execution. I said, looking directly into Jessica's terrified green eyes. I gave her a small, dark, me-and-my smile. On Tuesday night, as she boasted, she filed our certified state tax documents under penalty of perjury. She officially listed those stolen funds as an operational loss due to inventory waste. By doing so, she didn't just breach her contract. She committed felony corporate fraud against the state of Texas. Marcus, Jessica gasped, turning her head frantically toward her lover, her voice losing all of its sharp confidence, turning into a desperate, pathetic whine. Marcus, do something. Tell them it's a legitimate business partnership. Tell them. Marcus Vance looked at the documents showing his personal signature on the escrow accounts. The supreme arrogance that he had walked into the room with vanished instantly. He looked like a rat trapped in a flooding basement. I didn't know anything about a tax fraud. Marcus stammered, raising his hands, completely throwing her under the bus without a second thought. She told me it was her personal equity from a family trust. I had no idea she was skimming from Kevin's corporate accounts. I'm pulling the buyout offer. Vance Hospitality is completely withdrawing from this discussion. It's a little too late for that, Marcus, I said smoothly. You signed the receipt of stolen corporate funds. Your signature is on the deed of that warehouse. You're an accessory to grand larceny and corporate espionage. Your legal team is currently being served with a temporary restraining order freezing all of your expansion assets until the forensic investigation is complete. Marcus fell back into his chair, his face completely pale, his chest heaving. Jessica looked like she was about to vomit. The brilliant, sophisticated CFO was gone. In her place sat a cornered, desperate thief. She turned back to me, her eyes wild, trying one last-ditch effort to manipulate the room. Kevin, please. She sobbed, a single theatrical tear escaping her eye as she reached across the table toward me. We can fix this. I did it for us. I did it because I felt like you were pulling away from me. Marcus forced me into it. He threatened to ruin your business if I didn't help him. You know I love you, Kevin. We're a team. Think about our home, think about our future. The sheer trend of her lie was staggering. The board members looked at her with pure disgust. I did think about our future, Jess, I said, my voice dead and cold. In fact, I listened to you think about it last night at Marcus's lake house in Fort Worth. I reached over and pressed a button on my tablet. The audio from Miller's directional microphone blasted through the boardroom speakers, clear, loud, and absolute. Enjoy your little victory while you can, Marcus. Jessica's recorded voice echoed off the glass walls. Asterisk. Once I'm completely done with Kevin and his company, you're next on my list. Your corporate compliance records are an absolute mess, and I've got digital copies of every single one of them. Asterisk. Marcus Vance snapped his head around to look at Jessica, his eyes bursting with a terrifying, homicidal fury. You bitch. He snarled, standing up so fast his chair flipped backward onto the carpet. You were planning to blackmail me? No. Marcus, that's not what I meant. It's a setup. Jessica shrieked, backing away from him until she hit the floor-to-ceiling glass window. I looked at Eleanor. Eleanor stood up, pulled a final, single sheet of paper from her folder, and slid it directly down the center of the table. It stopped right in front of Jessica's trembling hands. This is a formal petition for an expedited divorce, certified by the family court this morning, Eleanor announced, her voice echoing with absolute authority. Pursuant to page 42, subsection D of the prenuptial agreement you signed 5 years ago, any act of willful financial fraud, embezzlement, or corporate malfeasance results in an immediate, total forfeiture of all marital property, all corporate equity, and all spousal support claims. Eleanor looked at Jessica, delivering the final, clinical blow. You are completely removed as CFO effective immediately. You own 0 shares of this company. You have 0 claims to Kevin's personal assets. And by tomorrow morning, your personal bank accounts will be legally frozen to satisfy the corporate restitution order. Jessica stared at the paper. Her breathing was fast, ragged. The mask had shattered completely, leaving nothing but the hollow, terrifying reality of her own undoing. She looked at the board members. They all turned their backs to her. She looked at Marcus, who was busy texting his criminal defense lawyers, completely ignoring her existence. She looked at me. I was just sitting there, completely calm, taking another slow sip of my ice water. "You're leaving me with nothing?" she whispered, her voice cracking, her face contorted in pure horror. "After 5 years, Kevin? You're leaving me with absolutely nothing?" "No, Jess," I said, setting my glass down with a soft click. "I'm leaving you with exactly what you earned. $0. The silence in the boardroom didn't break, it solidified. Jessica's 2 corporate lawyers didn't even look at her as they shut their laptops with identical, clinical clicks. "We are withdrawing as your representation, Jessica," the senior partner said, his voice flat as he stood up. "Our firm does not handle active felony fraud defense. You will receive our final invoice for this morning's session by end of day." They walked out, leaving the heavy glass door to swing shut behind them. Marcus Vance wasn't far behind. He threw one last, venomous glare at Jessica, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure hatred. "If my company goes under because of your little blackmail stunt, Jess, a frozen bank account will be the absolute least of your worries," he hissed, slamming his fist against the doorframe as he stormed toward the elevators. Jessica stood entirely alone against the window, her chest heaving underneath her green designer dress. She looked at Bill. She looked at Sarah. The board members simply looked away, adjusting their folders, completely erasing her from the room she had planned to conquer. "Bill," she whispered, her voice cracking, stripped of all its corporate arrogance. "You've known me for years. You know Kevin is cold. You know he's a monster. He set me up." Bill didn't look up from his papers. "You signed a fraudulent state document under penalty of perjury, Jessica. You stole from the people who built this company. Security is waiting downstairs to escort you from the premises." I watched her. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I felt a profound, chilling sense of clarity. Gillian Flynn once wrote that love is the ultimate disruption, but betrayal is a clean, sharp mathematical equation. Jessica had balanced her ledger with lies, and now the math was simply correcting itself. "Kevin," she said, turning her wild eyes toward me. She walked back to the table, her fingernails digging into the mahogany surface. "You can't do this. The Preston Hollow house is under both our names. The luxury cars, the custom furniture, the lifestyle. You can't just strip me of my life. I am your wife. The Preston Hollow house was purchased using an integrated corporate mortgage draw from our primary logistics subsidiary," I said, my voice empty of any anger, which only seemed to terrify her more. "Since that subsidiary was targeted by your fraudulent invoicing scheme, the property has been seized as a corporate asset to satisfy the internal restitution order. As of exactly 9 minutes ago, the locks on the front gate and the front door have been changed." She gasped, her face contorting into a look of pure, unadulterated shock. "My things. My clothes. My Chanel bags, my Cartier watches. You can't keep my personal property, Kevin. That is illegal. Every single one of those luxury items was purchased using the secondary Wells Fargo account registered to JV Holdings LLC. I replied, leaning forward slightly, letting her see the complete lack of mercy in my eyes. "The exact account you used to dump stolen corporate capital. In the eyes of the state of Texas, those aren't your personal belongings. They are the physical fruit of grand larceny. Arthur's forensic team is currently inside the house, cataloging every single item for auction to recover our operational losses." "You psycho!" she shrieked, the last remnants of her sophisticated mask shattering completely. She slammed her hands onto the table, her face inches from mine, spitting out her words with absolute venom. "You sat across from me at breakfast every morning knowing you were going to do this. You let me sign those papers. You let me ruin myself." "No, Jess," I whispered, my voice a dead calm whisper that cut through her screaming. "You ruined yourself the moment you thought a master's degree made you smarter than the man who built the foundation. You wanted the crown, But you didn't want to sweat for it. You chose to sleep with my rival. You chose to steal my money. I just gave you the paperwork to make it official. 2 uniformed security guards entered the boardroom, stepping up behind her with practiced, imposing movements. "Ma'am," the older guard said firmly, "it's time to leave." Jessica looked around the room one last time, searching for a single ally, a single face that would look at her with sympathy. She found absolutely nothing. She snatched her designer tote bag off the chair, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her car keys onto the carpet. She scrambled to pick them up, sobbing in a raw, ragged way that filled the room with a pathetic, desperate sound. "This isn't over, Kevin!" she yelled as the guards gripped her elbows, guiding her toward the exit. "I'll find a lawyer! I'll sue you for every penny! You'll see me in court! I look forward to it," I muttered as the glass door closed behind her for the final time. The state of Texas usually holds corporate fraud hearings on Tuesdays. The board meeting ended 20 minutes later. The buyout offer from Vance Hospitality was officially rejected, and Marcus Vance's own board initiated an emergency ouster against him by noon to protect their own stock prices from the impending IRS investigation. My company's reserves were restored through a private credit line secured by Eleanor Sterling within an hour, ensuring our expansion loans remained perfectly intact. 2 weeks later, I sat in my truck outside a small, rundown apartment complex on the industrial outskirts of Fort Worth. The sun was setting, casting a dirty orange glow over the asphalt. I watched Jessica step out of a rusted, decade-old sedan she had apparently borrowed from her sister. Her luxury SUV had been repossessed by the bank 3 days prior. She was wearing faded sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, carrying a single plastic laundry basket filled with her remaining cheap clothes, the only items the forensic team didn't seize because they had no resale value. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her high-priced attorneys had abandoned her the second her retainer check bounced. She was currently surviving on a public defender's schedule, waiting for her formal indictment for corporate embezzlement and state tax fraud. She looked older. The brilliant, sharp smile that had once frozen water was replaced by a permanent, bitter scowl. She walked up the concrete stairs to her tiny studio apartment, completely unaware that I was watching her from the shadows of the street. She had thought she was playing a brilliant game of chess. She had thought she was leaving me with nothing. Now, she was staring down the barrel of a multi-year prison sentence with absolutely $0 to her name. I turned the key in my ignition, the powerful engine of my truck roaring to life. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt the immense, quiet satisfaction of a clean spreadsheet. The house I built was safe. The parasite was gone. Some people think marriage is about love and emotion. But when you marry a narcissist, it's a high-stakes business transaction. And in business, you never let your partner steal the assets. If you made it this far, you know that loyalty isn't just an emotional choice, it's a legal obligation. Did Jessica get exactly what she deserved, or did my cold calculation go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Drop a like, subscribe for more real-life survival stories, and remember, always read page 42.